Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss this very important topic of how we best keep children in mind and in view in our service system responses and make sure we can include them in a meaningful way. My name is Anna and I'll be the facilitator today. So I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal lands today. For me, I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So again, thank you for joining us for this webinar today, with the topic being engagement with children. And today we're looking at preschool and sort of primary school age children. This is the second in a three-part webinar series that has explored approaches to engagement and assessment of children and young people and encourage service providers to think about how we best keep children in mind and in view. The webinar series is part of the Child Wellbeing Project that has been a partnership between the Centre for Excellence and Family Safety Victoria. So I'm very pleased to introduce Natalie Scira and Hannah West today. It's wonderful to have them joining us, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from them today. So Natalie and Hannah are both therapists at the Play Therapy Hub, who between them have extensive experience working with children across various settings. Natalie is a qualified play therapist and filial family therapist, who also has a number of years' experience as a primary school teacher. Natalie offers training and consultancy to parents and carers, educators, allied health services, and to agencies within the child and family sector. Hannah is a play therapist and social worker. In addition to her primary role as a child-centred play therapist, she is also a counsellor and advocate in the Royal Women's Hospital Sexual Assault Crisis Line team. And Hannah has several years of experience as a child protection practitioner. So just a few technical matters. We're going to have a bit of a presentation today, hear from Natalie and Hannah, and then there'll be a question and answer segment towards the last part of the webinar. If you do experience any technical issues, we recommend leaving and rejoining, as this often resolves the issue. And the webinar is being recorded, and a recording of the webinar along with links to any further resources will be emailed to all registered attendees after the session. So for anyone who registered but can't be here at the time slot, they will receive the recording. And yes, please type your questions and answers into the Q&A box, so I can refer to them at the time when the time comes. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now, and then we'll move over to hear from Natalie and Hannah with their presentation. Thank you, Natalie and Hannah.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. I'm Natalie, and this is my colleague Hannah, and we're really looking forward to talking with you all today. We just want to preface this by saying that the aim of today is really just to give you some background information and some general knowledge, and to provide you with a few practical strategies for how you might engage children in your agency work. And just to point out that some of these topics could be covered in detail over 2 to 3 days. So we're really just going to touch on a few things with you today. So what we'll be covering is we'll be looking at the importance of establishing safety when working with children. We'll be looking at how you can go about building relationships and advocating for the child. And then we'll look briefly at the trauma brain and related behaviours. And lastly, how to engage playfully with children who do have a trauma history. So when working with kids, the priority should be to establish safety in the first place. So there are a number of ways that we can do this. Firstly, establishing predictability and consistency. So both in the environment in which you're working, as well as your presentation with the child. So we know as agency workers, it's often hard to, being so busy in following through with things, but wherever possible, if you could follow through on things that you commit to doing with the child, that goes a long way in establishing safety. In terms of interacting with the child as well, predictability and consistency is important in your presentation. So you'll often be faced with challenging behaviours, and it may become quite challenging for you as well to remain regulated and to engage respectfully and empathically with the child. But if you can show up for the child in that way, that also helps to establish safety and reduces their likelihood of engaging with you through using a threat response. Also being honest, factual, and appropriate in your difficult conversations. So using child-friendly language is important, but still being factual, so the child knows exactly what's going to happen and there's no sort of elephant in the room. Also, proximity is important. So when you're approaching a child, it may be that sitting opposite them is going to feel a little bit more threatening than, say, positioning yourself to the side. And then just still conveying your interest by sort of leaning in, making eye contact and tracking what they're doing. So there are a few ways that you can go about establishing safety.
Another thing to add there is just around congruence and the importance of being consistent with, if you're saying something, making sure that your affect matches that. So if you go into a house and you don't want to be there, it's going to be really obvious to the child that you're stressed and your mind is elsewhere. They know that you're not attuned to them in that moment. So looking now at meeting the child where they are at, I know in agency work, you can read a lot about a child, but sometimes what you read on paper doesn't really match the child that you see in front of you when you go for a visit. So going in with an open mind and meeting the child where they are at, not necessarily at the age that you think that they should be at. So one of the most important things to look at is the need behind the behaviour. So often we look at the behaviour and how to address that. But when we see behaviour that is of interest to us, sometimes it can be really important to go, okay, if that's their behaviour, what is behind that? So, something simple like they're hiding behind mum. Okay, they're not feeling so safe. What can I do in this instance to help them to feel safe? Looking at attachment seeking as opposed to attention seeking. So those behaviors that can be attention seeking, that you might think, okay, they're asking lots of questions, lots of talking in circles without really making much sense, or being really dramatic and overreacting to little things. Looking at that instead of attention seeking and thinking they're seeking attachment. So in that moment, they're wanting help from an adult to support them to feel safe.
And just to ensure that their needs are being met, which, with the kids that you guys would work with, generally speaking, there might have been some trauma at an early age, so they haven't experienced adults to be safe people, and they haven't had their basic emotional and physical needs met. So so just shifting the way that you view their behaviour from attention seeking to attachment can really help in your interaction with the children you work with.
Yeah. And just our last couple of points, considering their emotional age and knowing that kids who have experienced trauma may not have their emotional age matching their chronological age, and considering the child as a bigger part of the picture. So a child doesn't exist in isolation. They exist as part of a much wider network. So thinking about family systems and how they fit within that. And often in family services, you guys are working with kids with complex family systems. There might be family violence, there might be drug and alcohol, there might be all these other things going on, and thinking how that impacts their ability to establish safety and to exist in the world with others. So looking at building relationships, and I think, for me, this is one of the most important things in a lot of social work roles and working with children and families, and remembering how important your role can be to them. Sometimes a social worker coming in or someone that's there to help them can be a safe adult that can make such a big difference in their lives. So not underestimating the value of your relationship to a child, even if they don't show you that. So some of the things to keep in mind in building relationships with children is having unconditional acceptance. So if kids might test you out to go, if I do, be mean to you or reject you, are you going to still like me? Are you still going to come back? And so for kids with parents, it's really important to have unconditional love from them. They don't always receive that. So if you as an adult can show them that they are okay the way they are and that you will accept them regardless of their behavior or regardless of what they show you, that can be really, really important in establishing trust and building relationship. So Nat touched on this earlier, but being reliable and trustworthy. So turning up when you say you're going to, I know that's hard and not always possible, but following through with the things you say you're going to as much as you can, and being honest in a developmentally appropriate way. Already touched on, never underestimate the power of relationship and connection. I've got a little quote here, a Bruce Perry quote, which I really like, which is, the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely they will be to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. So never underestimate the power of that relationship. Really simple, but really important. Like the child, if you don't like them and you go, oh, I have to go and see that kid now, and you don't want to be there, they can tell. And it's going to be really hard to establish safety in relationship with them, because they can feel that.
And they'll react accordingly as well.
Yeah.
They'll shut down, they'll push you away, they'll be, escalate their behaviors depending on their response.
Yeah.
So.
And rupture and repair is such an important thing to bear in mind. You might go out and have a terrible visit, things go wrong, you don't know what you're doing, it can feel really overwhelming, and you might go away going, oh no, my relationship with this child is now broken. It's not, it's ruptured. And what can be really, really powerful is having the time to repair that relationship. So every time there's a rupture, if you turn up again and you show them, even when things don't go well, I'm going to come back, that repair work can really be very, very powerful.
And even just owning your part in the rupture as well is really healing for the child. So we encourage you to have those kinds of conversations.
Say sorry when a child's angry at you and you've done something, whether it's intentional, accidental, you couldn't get there when you said you were going to. Apologize, own that, show them that everyone makes mistakes, and normalize that. We've got a little quote here: kids who need the most love will ask for it in the most unloving of ways. And so sometimes when kids are showing you that difficult behavior, sometimes looking at that and go, that again is back to that attachment seeking. But kids with big trauma histories that don't know what it is to be loved unconditionally, they might seek that in some really unloving ways.
Another really important thing to do is to make sure that you're advocating for the child. So that can look like giving them choice wherever possible. And that point is also linked to establishing safety and trust, and giving them back that control. So listen to them, ask them what they might need, go with your gut. So if you're sensing that there's something a little bit more to it, then dig a little deeper and try to consider, why might it be that they're feeling a particular way. and then give them opportunities to feel like they're in control. Looking beyond the problems is important as well. So a child is more than just their problems, and keeping that in mind as well when you're entering into care team meetings and writing reports and doing your assessments, that, you know, never lose sight of the child. And when I'm writing reports in play therapy, I always write the report with the view that the child may access the report and read something about themselves later down the track. So always, you know, keep that child at the forefront. Support them to express themselves and back them up in the event of any negative consequences. So, you know, just being mindful that if you're encouraging them to have a voice and to speak up, that you are still the adult. And so they may not have that support, and they're going to possibly need support if there are any repercussions or negative consequences from them voicing themselves. Actively listen to their viewpoint. So really just checking for accuracy, and that could be just paraphrasing what they've said. So, you know, it sounds like you might be wanting to X, Y, Z, and just paraphrase their information. Follow their lead where you can, again, about returning control to the child. So if you're visiting with a child and they're not able to keep still and they don't want to sit down and they prefer to jump on the trampoline, just knowing that that's okay, and maybe follow them out there and have your conversation out there instead, rather than having them conform to, you know, to a particular way of interacting. And allow them to communicate through play. So I probably don't need to tell you this, but play is the child's most natural way of communicating. And children don't always have access to, you know, a range of, have a detailed verbal capacity. So it's important for them to be able to communicate with you through play.
One of the things Nat just touched on, which I think is the most important thing on this slide, is looking beyond the problems. And I know, you know, my history in child protection, I've been in care teams where everyone's throwing the problems out there about the child, and making sure you're regulating the rest of the team as much as possible. And whether it's in your writing or whether it's in your care team's phone conversations, sitting back and reminding everyone to look at the need behind the behavior. If that's the behavior, what are they showing us, and how do we meet that need? So taking the focus off the behavior and onto the needs, and making sure the child's personality is reflected wherever you can. So not writing reports where it's a list of problems, writing reports where the actual personality of the child and the things that are good about them are reflected, so that people can, you know, that can really shift the way a whole group of people will look at a child. Especially when new workers come on, they read a list of problems and they get scared going out to see them. Then that sets them up for nervous, not in control, not
Rejection of the child.
Yeah. So just making sure that the personality is there, not just the problems. So looking at the trauma brain, and I know, you know, a lot of people that we're talking to today are in roles where they're working with children with a range of different trauma. And even where you can't see obvious trauma, often there is trauma that may not be so clear cut. And knowing that children, you know, babies, as they're born, as they develop, even in utero, their brain is constantly developing. And so when they experience trauma, that impacts the way that their brain develops. So kids that have had a lot of history of trauma, their brain is going to be on high alert and sensitively wired. So little threats that might seem little and insignificant to most people, for someone who's experienced a lot of trauma, they're going to be really, really sensitive to that. And so information that might be like neutral information is more likely to be perceived as a threat. And that's where, you know, things like your facial expressions, your demeanor, the way you interact with a child, when there is such extensive trauma, is even more important. You need to be really soft, really gentle, and more aware of those things to make sure that, yeah, you're being sensitive to their trauma brain. So hypervigilant in detecting threat. And so that's where kids might escalate a lot quicker for little things. And that when they are escalated, language and reasoning is reduced. So when you see a kid that's on high alert, a kid that's hyper aroused, a kid that's lost control and in a tantrum, whatever that might look like, remembering that their language base of their brain isn't activated very well in those times. So when you speak to them, they're going to have trouble registering your language, and their problem solving and reasoning capacity is also reduced. So, little problems can be huge when you can't problem solve and think your way through the problem. We've just added
a little graphic to this slide as well, and this is taken from Dr. Bruce Perry's work. So it's really a powerful visual because it compares a brain that's been impacted by developmental trauma with a typically developing brain. So as you can see on the left, cognition is strongest and more dominant in a typically developing brain, whereas that's actually flipped for children or individuals that have had developmental trauma impacted on them. So survival is the most significant response and highly developed response in those individuals' brains. So just looking at what these behaviours can register as or present as, so it really does depend on the way that the individual perceives the threat. So if the individual or the child believes that they could have some control over the challenge, then it's more likely to result in fight or flight behaviours. But if the child feels as if there is no overcoming this challenge, their body actually prepares for death. So that's where we see the shutdown and freeze or fall asleep response. So just touching on, we'll leave this slide up on the screen, but just picking out a couple of fight behaviours that might be typical for the children that you work with. So the obvious one is anger, aggression, rage. They'll be very loud, they'll be controlling. Perhaps there'll be some difficulty concentrating in their engagement with you and completing tasks, pushing people away, just being generally disrespectful. In contrast, flight behaviours could look a little bit different. So there's the child that's, keeping super busy, unable to sit still, the child that feels the need to run away, the child that's constantly asking to go to the toilet, even though there may be no medical issues present, constantly asking to go and get something located outside of the room, hiding under tables, avoiding you in the extreme, crying, even hyperactive, giddy and silly are presenting behaviours of the flight response. And then lastly, freeze behaviours. So this is when the body shuts down. So the child could appear confused and forgetful or just disengaged, not interested, bored, not listening, constantly scanning the room. They might appear to be daydreaming or staring into space. They might be clumsy, or they might just present as sleepy and drowsy.
So some of these responses I think can be really helpful. So when people are coming to you, parents, schools, care teams, saying these are the things these are the presenting behaviours of the child, thinking, okay, what does that tell us? That tells us they're in a fight response, and flipping that and showing that there's a fight response. So how do we meet the need? So using these as a way of redirecting the way that a child's spoken about. It can be really helpful to just look at these lists and go, okay, that's what we're looking at. That's what we're dealing with.
And again, some of these areas could be unpacked in more detail. So this is just very sort of glossed over information. But one of the important things to do too is when a child is so highly dysregulated is to regulate first and then reason with them. So as Hannah said, when we were talking about the brain a little bit earlier, a child in this mode or this state of hyperarousal is not going to hear you when you try to reason with them. So always really important to connect first, bring them back down, and then work backwards from there.
And that co-regulation is so important. If you're not regulated, it's going to be really, really hard for you to help regulate a child. It's taking a moment, take a breath yourself, and the more regulated your nervous system is, the better you'll be able to help soothe the child.
And research has shown that a child actually needs to borrow the nervous system of a stable adult to be able to regulate themselves. So that is really important. So what are some of the ways that you might go about playfully engaging children? So The first thing is to be authentic, and we've covered this before, but again, kids can sense when you're not being true to yourself, or when there is an elephant in the room, so to speak, and they'll register that as a threat. And that's when you'll start to see those escalating behaviours. So always being authentic is important. We talked about proximity as well. So again, just making sure that you're positioning yourself in a non-threatening way in relation to the child. So sitting behind, using a gentle voice, tuning into them by, orienting your body in their direction, making good eye contact. And sometimes eye contact as well can be threatening. So if you're sensing that a child is not wanting to make eye contact with you, then there are other things you could do, which we'll get into, to show that you're present and understanding without being so confronting for them.
And, with this section, we're kind of just providing offerings that may be things that might help. But when you're thinking about how to engage a child, really think about that child that you're engaging with. What are they showing you? What do they like? What do they need? Because it will be very unique for each child.
So for non-verbal kids too, you might consider the use of puppets, because puppets can be a good medium between you and them, and a non-threatening way for them to interact as well. And the other thing is too, that you might consider using a different range of puppets. So you might, rather than using a boy or a girl, you might introduce, say, animal puppets, which are again a step back from a more realistic interaction. And you might include as well predatory animals or, fantasy type puppets to allow them to convey a range of emotional expressions.
So one thing that I've done before in my role is in child protection, it's hard to, in those roles when you need to interview a child, you need to get information, and sitting across from a child and asking some really intense questions can be really threatening for a child. And so one thing that I have used for a child that didn't want to look at me, didn't want eye contact, so wanted to engage with me, but didn't want to be looking at me when the questions were asked. So I found quite a playful way of engaging by we sat next to each other. And we sat a teddy bear on a chair in front of us. So I asked the questions to the teddy bear, and then the child then answered to the teddy bear and was able to engage in that because the pressure of the eye contact was removed, and that's what he needed to feel safe to be able to engage in that questioning and discussion.
And just on from the direct questioning as well, it's helpful to use reflective statements, so that you could reflect the emotion behind the child's response. So you might use a reflection like, oh, you're feeling really angry right now. Or, I can see this is really hard for you, and matching the energy rather than the affect. So we're not going to ourselves become angry, but we're going to show in the intensity of our voice that we understand them and we get them. And that alone can help to de-escalate.
It sounds really simple, but showing a child you understand where they're at by reflecting their emotion or reflecting what's going on for them, because sometimes they're not aware of what's happening for them. Their nervous system is taking over. So some of those reflecting statements can help them to go, oh, okay, you understand, you get me. And it can be really soothing in itself.
And maybe not direct questioning, as Hannah mentioned, but using wondering statements. So we can just rephrase what we want to know, but we could just wonder about it rather than directly ask, like, I wonder if you're feeling unsafe right now. And that's just inviting the child to respond, but it's taking that pressure off them feeling that they really have to give you an answer. And again, returning the control back to the child. The other thing we thought of too that you might want to consider is just putting together a small toy kit for your visit. So it doesn't need to have anything too fancy in it, but considering, maybe including some arts and craft material, maybe a puppet, maybe a game, just some playful ways that you could at least engage with the child while you are wanting to get the information that you're obviously there for.
Yeah, and in my experience, kids have shared the most information in settings where you're not asking them questions. So settings where they're feeling safe, they're having fun, whether that's jumping on a trampoline with you, doing something fun, playing with them can help set up a space for them to share things that you might not know is going on for them. But through play, they might show you or start that conversation. And if you are wanting to prepare a toy kit for things to like bring in with you, we have these squishy balls here, which are great. So kids, when they come into our playroom, we're play therapists, they come in feeling really nervous, not so sure. And so having something to just squeeze and like this can really just help calm and soothe and regulate for the child. So that's brought over some other ideas of things.
Some bubbles and some puppets. We've got a predatory puppet here. So all of these things can be expressive and regulating as well and help you to engage. So look, what we've raised so far, we've moved through that very quickly, and all of that is part of a bigger conversation. But we did want some time to hear from you. What are some things that you would like to know? Some things that we can help. Want to open up for question and answer time.
Thank you so much, Natalie and Hannah. Lots of rich information, and I think lots for us to think about. Practitioners who work with children across, various settings. I think we could all go away after this and really look at our spaces, our office spaces, and just try to view those through the eyes of a child and see how welcoming or child-friendly those spaces might be. Even, as you mentioned, making some small changes could go a long way towards making children feel like the spaces were really inclusive for them. And, I love that idea of just painting a bit of a picture of the child there as a whole person, their interests, their strengths. Maybe there's ways we could change up a little bit how we make referrals and things like that. Now I'm just imagining receiving a referral with this, description of the child and what they like doing and who they are, and getting a bit of a picture of who they are as a person, as you said, rather than perhaps dot points of the problems or things that haven't gone so well in their lives. Well, I'll just start off with a couple of questions myself, and then we'll move to the Q&A box. So yes, please type your questions into the Q&A box. We do have some time now to respond to questions. But from me, I'd like to sort of think about perhaps how we best talk with parents about the importance of and the need to obtain and include their child's or children's views. What would you say about how we can sort of work with parents in that way? Particularly if they might be hesitant or unsure around, what it means for a practitioner to speak with their child.
I think bearing in mind that a lot of parents that we work with in this space also have that trauma history. So really similar to how you would try and engage a child in helping build that safety and build a relationship, using those principles with adults as well, and helping them to build that trust, build that relationship. Because if they don't trust you, they're going to have that same, fight or flight response when it comes to, they love their child. They don't know what's going to happen if you speak to them. They can, little things can raise their threat detectors, and they can be really on high alert. So showing them that you are safe, showing them that you care, showing them that you like them and you're not there to judge them as much as you can, which is, I know, hard in some roles when you have assessments and things you need to make. But I think
always approaching it with a sense of empathy and, the view that they've done the best that they can, and that they may have limited capacity, but that's all the capacity that they have. And so they've done the best with what they have.
But I think, acknowledging, same with the child, you need to make it clear what needs to happen and what the expectations are. I need to be able to speak with your child because of, you know, whatever your role is and whatever's going on there. But yeah, showing that empathy, understanding, I understand this is really scary, and helping them perhaps to have some power and control in how that happens. You know, where would you like us to talk? Is there a space where you, you know, would like us to talk and feel comfortable? But I think if you're doing it in a playful, engaging with kids in a playful way, rather than sitting across from the table throwing questions at them, as well as helping the child feel safe, that's going to take a bit of the pressure off the parent and help them feel a little bit more secure in that as well. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. That's great. Lots to think about again, and that makes a lot of sense. And just on that, you know, I think an important part of that is also letting the parent and the child, you know, obviously age appropriate with what they can understand, but to let them know what will be done with the information that they provide. So I know you talked about sort of supporting the child through any consequences of you know, what they share, or backing them up with the impact of the information they provide. And I feel
making sure they have as much information about why you need to speak to the child and what's going to happen after that, so that the more informed they are, the more in control they'll feel.
Yeah, I think the key point there is to making sure that you're making the unknown known as much as you can.
Yes, for sure. And we know that, you know, having information is important for control, which again is really important for people who may feel somewhat out of control and have anxiety around entering a service, or entering into some sort of unknown space. And another question I had was, what might be some particular ideas you could offer when, I guess, there's limited opportunity for meeting with a child, for example, sort of in an intake context? And I know that some of the ideas you've discussed so far today could be applicable within within any setting. So, but yeah, just wondered if you had any thoughts on particularly when there is limited time and opportunity to meet with a child.
Yeah, that can be definitely a challenging one when you don't have that time to establish the safety and establish the trust before. So I think something to bear in mind is when we talk about kids in front of kids, that can raise their threat detectors and put them on high alert. So, you know, where possible, trying to include the child in the conversation, rather than, you know, sometimes you've got all these things you need to say to a parent, but talking about a child in front of them can be, you know, quite confronting for them. So trying to include them, all the things we spoke about. So when they come in, liking them, being nice, being friendly, thinking about what they're showing you and what they, you know, what that need is to help them to feel safe.
And a lot of that is conveyed through non-verbal cues as well. So it's amazing what people can pick up. And, you know, we ourselves would know as adults when we're interacting with new people, we can sum them up in the first 30 seconds really and establish trust or mistrust. So just in the way that we present ourselves and in being present or not. That's a big difference.
First impression is so important. So just being friendly, open, and non-confrontational, you know, as a safe person is going to be really helpful.
Great, thank you. And I think it comes back to what you had mentioned earlier as well around, you know, being the practitioner, being relaxed and sort of willing to give it a go, because I guess the child's sort of going to pick up if you're feeling very anxious and under pressure to obtain certain information within a certain time frame. I'll just pick up a couple of questions from the audience. So we have a question around suggestions to have conversations with teenagers. So we're going to be covering that in our third webinar in this series. The first one was focused on infants and toddlers. This is around primary school age children, preschool and primary school age children. And so please tune in. That'll be the 11th of August at, from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. And I'll send the the details through the usual avenues, but actually when I send out the recording for this webinar, I'll include the link for the next one to register. So yes, please tune in, because we'll cover across that's where we're going to get to the final age cohort, young people.
Something just to bear in mind, Anna, is, teenagers, chronological age, but, sometimes a lot of the teenagers we work with, when there's that trauma history, their developmental age may be quite different, and keeping that in mind.
Yes, great point. Thank you. Just move to the next question. So we've got a question here, I'll just read it out. What are some of the tips for workers in being parent sensitive and still able to be healthily curious with children in terms of dialogue and assessment, particularly when the worker does not have children themselves? So it sounds like that's really around, engaging with children while being sensitive to parents as well. And it sounds like the question is sort of, perhaps coming from someone who may have not have much experience with children and not having their own children.
I don't think you need to have your own children to be able to have empathy for parents and understanding of, some of the challenges they might face. But I think in a lot of roles, family services sector, it's really important to go in with curiosity. You don't need to go in as the expert that knows everything. The parent is the expert on their child. No one's going to know their child better than them. So it's okay to not have children and not know everything about children, because I think that curiosity and being willing to engage the parent on an even playing field is more important. And it's okay to say that, look, you're the expert on your child. What do you think?
I would agree.
So, and in being curious with children, I think, when dealing with parents and working with parents, using that reframing with them as well, at helping them to understand the behaviour of their children in terms of the needs can be really, really helpful as well.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Did you have something you were going to add there, Natalie?
Oh no, it was
yes.
no,
That's great.
no, I was agreeing.
Okay, great. And we have another question, which is how to handle children giving rehearsed answers. So that's an interesting one.
Well, again, I think about being curious about why do you think they might be giving rehearsed answers? Is it because they're being coached by the parent? In which case, does the parent then not feel safe? And so, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Hannah, but because I haven't worked in your space, but I know even as a teacher that, this sort of thing can happen. So just going in with the empathy towards the parent, establishing the safety, and then getting curious with the child as well. And like, oh, it sounds like, it doesn't you're saying one thing, but it sounds like maybe you're wanting to tell me something a little bit different, and just being curious there.
Yeah. And I know in some roles you need to go in and for whatever reason you need to be asking those directive questions, but where you can, trying to avoid doing that with kids, because that's also alerting their threat detectors. So doing things like, hi, I'm here to hang out, here to chat, engaging with the child in a way that helps them to feel safe first before going into questions. So jumping on the trampoline, or, playing a game, engaging with the toys that they have in their house, so that they kind of feel comfortable first. And then, more things are likely to come up. They're likely to tell you things when they're in that settled space. But if, they've been in
defense mode.
Yeah. So they're more likely to kind of share what's happening for them in that instance. But if they have been rehearsed and you sit down and you go, okay, how are things at home? And mum said, tell them everything's good. And they sit there and go, yes, mum's really good. This is what's been happening. And you can tell that's rehearsed. Maybe try and shake things up a bit and go, okay, I can see, maybe you're feeling a little bit nervous, or I can see this feels like, you need to say the right things. But also being honest and going, look, I know you love your mum and you really want to protect her. But what's really important here is that, you share things with me that are going on so that I can best help you and best support you. But regardless, sometimes, if they're rehearsed, they're rehearsed. But the relationship that you have and the trust, even if you say all the right things during an interview, if they don't have that safety and trust with you, they're not going to share more things with you. They're not going to open up and be honest with you about that. So, also, it can be really disappointing when you go, I know there's more here and I'm really worried, but showing the child that even though you know that maybe their answers aren't coming from them, that you still like them and you still turn up and you still have that unconditional positive regard for them, because the next time you come, they might have thought about it and gone, actually, that person is safe. Maybe I do need to share what's really going on here.
Great. Thanks so much, Natalie and Hannah. If anyone else has any questions, please pop them in now. Great to hear.
Yeah, we would love to hear more from you, because we didn't want to go, it's such a broad topic. There's so much to talk about. We could talk about child engagement all day.
Behaviours.
Yeah. But I think some of the biggest takeaways that we want you to have is, that lens of what is the child showing us with their behaviours, and really looking at how to address the need, not addressing the behaviours.
Yeah. So a relational approach.
Yeah.
Above all else.
Yeah.
And I find those the conversation sort of prompts that you just mentioned really useful for people. Would you have any more that pop into your minds around perhaps how to approach conversations with children of this age?
Well, I think always through the play. I mean, that's the foundation of our work. Sometimes we work with kids that don't give us anything at all non-verbally. So just looking at maybe if they're going to engage with you playfully, having a look at what toys they select, even how they play with them. Are they using aggressive toys to convey emotion? Are they, gravitating towards sensory toys? That can tell you a lot as well about what might be going on for them. What would you?
And something that I have learned a lot in play therapy that I wish I had when I was working in the child protection space is having those empathetic reflections. So if you enter a house and there's a really shy child that's not yet nonverbal, or just choosing not to speak to you because their threat detectors have gone child protection or family services or unknown person, stranger in the house, or I'm in a strange environment, having some statements like, oh, I can see you're not so sure about me. Doesn't feel so safe having someone you don't know coming into the house. Because often the roles we have, depending on the history of the child that's not known to you, might be that people that come here aren't so safe, or mum said they're not so safe. And so having some of those reflection statements. I can see you peeking at me over there. You're thinking about talking to me, but you're not so sure yet. Some of those statements.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, and that's about, meeting the child where they're at. And we always work with where the child is at emotionally. So again, as Hannah said, you need to go with, how they're approaching the situation, rather than try to push your agenda onto them, because it's just going to raise their threat response, and then you'll get nothing anyway.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's some really great points you've raised there. And, even if the child doesn't give much at all verbally, we could really case note and capture perhaps some, quite rich information about the child and what we noticed about them. And that may, go quite a long way towards sort of, starting to understand their situation and what's going on for them. We've got a couple more great questions that have come through, so I'll go through those. I really like this one. So how do we safely end the engagement with a child in a way that feels genuine, particularly after they have shared what's going on for them? And this particular example is around a one-off session.
Yeah, I'm really glad that question's been asked. I think that's a really big point and something that we haven't touched on yet that we probably should have. So I'm glad you've asked that question, because endings are really important. I'll kind of talk a little bit broadly and then we'll go more into the specifics of the one-off session. But when you build a relationship with a child, sometimes we're not aware of how important we are in their world. And to end a relationship and just not come back one day because you've got another job or you've closed with the family, or for whatever reason, trying to give the child as much notice and being really honest about how long you're going to be involved for, or you go, okay, I've been working with them for a really long time, and I'm leaving my job, trying to tell them as soon as you can so that you can prepare them for the ending.
I think preparing for endings from the beginning is important, which is what we do in our work. So you always have that, that in mind. It's not that, we're going to come up to one more session and then that's it. Just always preparing for ending.
So if it is a one-off session, maybe letting them know from the start, I'm really hoping to get to know you and spend some time with you today. But, I don't know exactly what the wording you would use, but letting them know that you're not someone that's going to be around in their life forever. And the biggest damage comes from those longer term relationships. If they end without warning and you just one day don't come back, they may internalize, oh, why hasn't that person that came every week or every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, where have they gone?
Is there something wrong with me?
Is it because I was naughty, I was bad? So those internalized feelings of I'm not lovable or I'm not good enough and that's why they're not here, can be really, really damaging. And it's hard because as professionals, we do build such close relationships with children, and then we're not there forever. We're not meant to be there forever. So making sure they know that from the start as much as you can.
And being authentic in the way that you're feeling as well, that, this is hard for me too, having to say goodbye, and it's difficult saying goodbye, and just being honest in the way that you feel as well, and bringing that genuineness into the relationship or the ending.
And it can be awkward. So sometimes the instinct is to avoid it because it's hard, it's uncomfortable, but letting them, at the end going, oh, we've just shared some really big things with each other. And now it's time to go. I wish we could see each other more, but, that's not what's going to happen now. So just, naming the elephant in the room, not shying away from it, helping them be prepared for that. Yeah.
And I think certainly, within a single session or the context of a one-off session where we might not be seeing the child again, and they have shared some information, it would be important to let them know next steps. I think sometimes we, forget to do that with children, don't we? So we could, explain to them what's going to happen from here, what will happen with their information in a child-friendly way. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, that rather than them worrying what happens now, let them know. Yeah, being honest and open as much as you can.
Preparing them where you can.
Great. Well, just got time for one more question, so we'll go through this one and then we'll finish up. If a child is very aggressive and disrespectful due to having a new person in the home, would you do short sessions to build that trust? Thank you for that question. So, yeah, another good one.
I think you need to go off the child there, and it depends on your role. There's lots of variables there, but aggression in children with trauma is something that we do see a lot.
And that's that fight response.
Yeah.
So they've obviously detected a threat,
and that's where those threat detectors might go off at the slightest thing. You're new, no matter how you present, they're going to go off. And so maybe it is kind of spending less time to slowly build their tolerance to you and to new people, and going, okay, I can see you really don't want me here today. You really wish I would go. It's making you feel uncomfortable having me here. I do need to speak to mum today, but if you don't want to spend time with me, I'll leave. So, it's
control,
helping them feel some level of control where they can. And so it might be, I was really hoping to spend some time with you today, after I talk to mum. But if you if you're not wanting to spend time with me today, I can see you're feeling really angry and you really wish I wasn't here. Today, you don't have to if that's what you choose. But I'm going to come back, depending on your role again, but, if you have those ongoing relationships, but I'm going to come back again. And I really hope that you'll want to talk to me next time. So yeah, helping them feel in control, reflecting that you understand where they're coming from, and still liking them. And so showing them that, okay, you've rejected me today. That's okay. I'm still going to come back and I'm still going to like you no matter what you show me. And eventually, using all those things we've spoken about building safety, building relationship, eventually that child will go, okay, maybe I'll give them a go. But sometimes it can be really, really hard work. And that's where liking the child and, going in open-minded every session, not going in, oh, they're going to yell at me again, going in with a, fresh as you can. So if you're having a bad day, maybe, that's not the day to visit the child. Visit them on a day where you can regulate and you can be as open as you possibly can be.
Thank you so much, Natalie and Hannah. And, I think that reframing of the ways children can present is really valuable, which you went through earlier. Fight, flight and freeze presentations, might just encourage us to rethink or, have a reframe on some ways children can present to us. And as you mentioned, thinking about where they're coming from and what their needs might be. It may not be that their intention is to be disrespectful or rude. However, they're feeling threatened, they're coming across that way, they don't know how else to be in the world at that point in time. And we the adults can be the wiser ones and look at meeting the child's needs.
Being the regulator as much as we can.
Well, we'll just finish up now. It's nearly 2 o'clock. So thank you so much, Natalie and Hannah. It's been, really rich conversation today, lots to think about, and hopefully everyone can feel inspired to go away and reflect on their practice, think about how they can meaningfully include children in your services, and just to reiterate that the recording will be sent out. So to all those who've registered to attend for the Eventbrite, give me a few days, but I'll send out the recording. And as for seeing the previous session, I'll see if I can get the link to that one sent out as well, along with the link to this one. Yes, because that was the link there with the previous webinar. We, as I said, focused on infants and young children. There was also a recording of that one. So let me see if I can get that sent out alongside the recording of this one. And as I mentioned, there'll also be the webinar focused on engaging with adolescents, with young people next Thursday. The 11th, on the 11th of August. So we've got several thank yous coming through, and again from me, thank you so much, and thanks for everyone joining us today.
Thank you from the both of us as well.
Thank you, Natalie and Hannah.